This is the oil cooler, oil filter, housing assembly on your 4-cylinder Toyota truck from 1995 to 2023. So let's jump back in time and see what it takes to remove this from the car. So it does need to come off the car if you want to replace all the O-rings inside of it. The exhaust manifold is removed from my truck, and that will make your life substantially easier to take this off the car. There is one challenging nut, and basically this is the tool you're going to need, a long 12mm wobbly through the fender well. If you have an Exxon Valdez leak coming off the oil filter, make sure you look at the head gasket because mine was completely shredded and puking some kind of substance. So this turned into a head gasket job, but I'm going to finish the video in case you are going to leave the engine in the truck. The long bolts going into the oil filter housing assembly are pretty easy to remove. It's just that one nut on the bottom that's a little bit tight. The two hoses going into the oil filter housing are coolant lines for the oil cooler. So you do need to remove a 12mm bolt holding that line in place. So once you wiggle this free, you could potentially replace this oblong shape O-ring, but mine was basically so disintegrated, I knew I needed to take the whole thing off of the car. So this is a coolant line, so you're going to have to drain the coolant and bleed it. You are not replacing this O-ring into the oil filter housing assembly unless you remove that thing from the car. And this one has turned to absolute stone. So let me show you the trick on how to take stone cold O-rings off of a car. You need to get a straight pick that is very sharp, and you basically need to split the stone cold O-ring in half. And let me explain to you what happens to O-rings after 27 years. Splitting the oil cooler oil housing assembly is very easy. One 30mm nut and this will pop right out. And there is one 10mm nut to basically get you in the right orientation. I'm performing a budget restoration and avoiding the dealership whenever possible. So I ordered a whole bunch of O-rings from Amazon and eBay. So this is the Dorman oil filter housing reseal kit with an upgraded large O-ring for the oil cooler. Now we need to look at this piece right here, and it goes through there. So there's a couple O-rings to make sure the oil doesn't mix with the coolant and it doesn't leak out on the ground. And these O-rings are very specialty. The O-rings inside of the oil cooler were completely stone cold and shredded, so this was a long process of cleaning. It's a good idea to pressure test this oil cooler because you do not want oil and coolant mixing around. If you want to replace all the O-rings inside of the oil cooler oil filter housing assembly, you need to pay attention closely here. So I blanket ordered a whole bunch of parts, including the cheapy Dorman set. So the Dorman set doesn't look too bad, to be honest, because it has most of the O-rings and it costs $17. So the Dorman one has this O-ring and this O-ring, but it is missing this O-ring and this O-ring. And those two O-rings on the top, you're gonna have to get from the dealership or super special order because of the shape. The OEM Toyota manual shows 2 of these O-rings, but I basically looked at this for like 15 minutes and you only need 1, and it goes inside of the oil cooler underneath the lip. So it's a little bit tricky to get the old one out. You have to kind of look in there. It is an excellent idea if your coolant hoses to the oil cooler are completely roached, soft, super hard, or worn out to replace them at this time. The problem is this one from the dealership costs $17 for a tiny O-ring. So there'll be a whole bunch of videos on how to replace every coolant, O-ring, and hose on this truck in the future, so press subscribe or watch this playlist.